Denis Villeneuve's Sicario has been praised for its direction and its ability to create tension for the audience. This analysis aims to dig into the story, themes, and characters from this dark thriller. One of Sicario's most present themes is that of duality. Like the Tai Chi symbol, both sides are interconnected, dependent upon each other, and parts of one greater whole. Now, at its most macro level, Sicario is about America and Mexico, and the border which separates them. We learn as the story goes on that the border isn't as definitive as first thought, and the lines between the countries are crossed and blurred. This perfectly reflects a more intimate emotional arc of Emily Blunt's character, Kate. Her conflict surrounds doing things by the book.
Sir.
Yeah.
U.S. Attorney wants a statement. What do you want me to say to her?
The truth.
In line with the law and her values. Now, the flip side of this is the crimes of wrongdoing which she fights against. So it's very fitting then that the climax of the story isn't a huge action set piece, but a very quiet moment of pressured choice, where Kate's idealism is tested against this new darker side of the law which she has been exposed to. Elia Kazan, stage director and film director, describes in his book this piece of writing advice: unity from climax. Everything should build to the climax. Sicario is a clear example of how every moment, conflict and line of dialogue builds to this climax, and this moral choice for Kate. The theme of duality also runs throughout the relationships of characters from each country. Both America and Mexico have parallel power hierarchies. Characters like Matt, whose smugness and arrogance represents America's confidence in its own power, and Manuel Diaz, who represents the same level of authority, but through the Mexican drug cartel rather than law enforcement. These figures don't seem to answer to anyone, and both have pawns in their countries which are manipulated for their own causes. Kate becomes the pawn of the American side, controlled and kept in the dark by Josh Brolin's character. Her character is reflected in Silvio, who also acts as a member of law enforcement in the Mexican side. But the most interesting part of these two pawn figures is the fact that both are shaped by the environment around them. In an effort to survive in Mexico, Silvio has to perform criminal acts and becomes one of the many corrupt cops. Just like the way Kate has fallen for the American idealism of doing what is right and has developed strong morals and values, which will ultimately be tested by the darkness and the true colours of the system around her. Now that we have an understanding of the setting and effect on these characters, we can start to dig into Alejandro, the biggest enigma of the film. Little backstory is provided for him, but we learn that he once had a family and lived the life of an attorney. Despite his seemingly lack of humanity throughout the film, he still wears his wedding ring as a last sign of connection to the man he used to be, before the system turned him into this monster, like Frankenstein hunting down his creator.
They cut off his wife's head and threw his daughter into a vat of acid.
After enough loss and suffering, he becomes part of the blurred authority which controls those who are unaware. Seeing the tragedy and result of his arc is crucial, as it foreshadows the depths that Kate's character may fall if she decides to choose that same path of losing her humanity and morals. The irony of Alejandro's character is that he recognizes the innocence and naivety in Kate's character. Despite his darkness, Kate acts as a mirror to reflect back the humanity which he once held. Because of Kate's vulnerability and association with Alejandro's personal life, their relationship becomes very complex. On one hand, he becomes a sort of protector for her.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine.
How's the neck?
It's better, thank you.
Saving her, opening up to her even for a moment, reassuring her, sparing her life by shooting her vest instead of a straight kill, which could have easily gone unnoticed in this situation. Making the climactic scene even more complex as Alejandro recognizes too much humanity and softness still in Kate. He tells her,
You should move to a small town where the rule of law still exists. You're not a wolf, and this is the land of wolves now.
he doesn't want Kate to suffer the same burden he lives with, and despite forcing her to break her own code of ethics, He wants her faith to remain and not turn into him. This is why the follow-up moment to this initial choice is the real test. In order to do what she feels is right and stop Alejandro for his manipulation, she must cross that line and become one of those corrupt authority figures that she didn't agree with in the beginning. In order to stop Alejandro, she must become Alejandro, and by not shooting him, she is saying, I am not like you, I refuse to become part of this destructive cycle of vengeance. And the reversal of Alejandro's character in the climax is powerful because early on in the film, she acts as Kate's protector. As a floating authority on both America and Mexico, Alejandro is able to use both Kate and Silvio as pawns for his personal revenge. He also shoots both characters without hesitation or remorse. Both Kate and Silvio demonstrate elements of humanity towards Alejandro, but the reason he doesn't kill Kate is because her humanity affects him. If you've seen Denis Villeneuve's previous two films, Prisoners and Enemy, you'll know that he knows how to end a film, not just in the climax but the final frames before the credits. Sicario is no different. On first viewing, the ending didn't hit me as much, as Silvio's story seemed almost unnecessary, until I was able to understand that Silvio as the opposite side and reflection of Kate, a pawn trapped in the system and being shaped by the environment. This led to the tragic and helpless ending of his son playing football. Despite his youth and innocence, the gunshots are a dark reality that he is trapped in the system, and that one day will be forced to face the world around him. With the title card overlaying the son's image, this could refer to the inevitability that he will grow up into a corrupt world and become either his father, retain some element of humanity like Kate, or perhaps the darkest truth is that he could be the next hitman produced by this world, the next Sicario.
No.
The ending game of football is a great metaphor for the drama of the film, a game with two sides, two teams, rules but no seeming boundaries or limitations. The title of the film originates from, which refers to one of the earliest forms of organized assassination during the Roman times. This has been going on for centuries, which strengthens the possibility that this cycle of violence and the environment could produce more hitmen is a highly probable one. Even after the mission is achieved and the top drug dealer is killed to create change, the violence still continues. There are a few strong motifs used throughout the film to support the narrative, like the use of landscapes. The harshness of this world is shaping these characters. The continual beige colour representing the ambiguity of morals and borders compared to Kate's effort to do things the black and white, right and wrong way. The use of the American flag every time Kate has to make difficult choices and assert her moral code, almost like an external visual of an internal strength of character. But notice how the presence of the American flag fades throughout the course of the film. But my favourite motif used throughout the film is the use of light and dark. Unlike Star Wars where light is good and dark is bad, the colours here, much more like the narrative, are more ambiguous. The colour palette constantly has light and darkness interacting and changing, moving from strong contrast of knowing right from wrong to a much more blurred and uncertain greys by the end of the story. The opening shot of the film shows a strong beam of light cut through the darkness, letting us know that Kate will be the rare light among a much more common dark characters of the story. We also see variations of close-ups and a repeated motif showing the air particles playing with the light and the darkness. But the scene that grabbed me on the first viewing was the use of light in the climax. Alejandro is purposefully kept in the darkness, showing his inner tragedy and current view on the world. Kate is positioned against a fully white background, showing her innocence and naivety. Appropriately separated, giving them different viewpoints and illustrating the conflict and choice that Kate must make between right and wrong. After signing the document and confronting Alejandro, each character's backgrounds are flipped. Kate is now surrounded by blacks and greys as she attempts to stop Alejandro. Can she cross this final threshold and become one of the people that she disapproves of? Alejandro is now almost silhouetted against a bright light background. For me, this represents his faith in Kate's innocence, as he displays his confidence by turning fully to face her, as he knows Kate won't do it. But another part of me thinks, now that he has avenged his family, he is cured of this deep rage Emmanuel Diaz caused to his life. He states earlier,
To find them would be like discovering a vaccine.
although we understand that stopping the main drug dealer should have a positive effect on the people, he could also be using this phrase in a personal context. By finding the man who killed his family and seeking vengeance, he will be relieving himself of the burden of suffering, and the vaccine could be a reference to allowing him to finish something with the man who created him. He certainly doesn't react in the same counter-aggressive way like the first time Kate pointed a gun at him. There is almost an element of acceptance as he turns.
Don't ever point a weapon at me again. Catch your breath. Get back.
The journey of the film is reflected in the visuals as characters descend deeper and deeper into darkness. One of the ways that the film effectively creates tension for the audience is by seeing the narrative through Kate's point of view. This works well because as a pawn figure in the system, Kate is purposefully kept in the dark, with information and never being totally clear on the authorities' loyalty or mission objective. Kate's idealistic attitude is stated in one of her early lines about how things were carried out. Without any hesitation, she knows the right thing to do. This is an appropriate bookend for the film, as she must make the same decision at the end of the film, but under much more difficult circumstances. We also see two instances where Kate shoots and kills someone at the early part of the films, but with two very different reactions. Both shots are in reaction to being fired at herself. The first she believes to be by the book, and second is surrounded by greys and ambiguities and uncertainty about the mission. Kate is clearly frustrated, and despite her choice to stay in the car and not engage with the situation, she gets forced and connected to this experience by her reaction and immediately feels guilty for crossing that line. Denis Villeneuve is quickly becoming one of my favourite filmmakers. His powerful performances and attention to film form have provided some of the most tense and thrilling cinematic experiences for me personally.
Crazy mother.